The first gunshot rang out just as Josephine Bailey finished tucking the youngest orphan into bed, and she knew immediately that singing would be the only thing to keep the children from panicking in the small wooden building on the outskirts of Elko, Nevada, in the summer of 1882. The mining town had grown rowdy over the past months, with prospectors flooding in after rumors of a new silver vein spread through the territory. Josephine had arrived 6 months earlier, a 22-year-old widow who had lost her husband to typhoid before they could even celebrate their first anniversary. She had nowhere else to go, no family to take her in, and when she heard that the small orphanage in Elko needed someone to help care for the children, she had volunteered without hesitation. The building was nothing more than a converted storehouse, drafty in winter and sweltering in summer, but it had become her whole world. Now, as the sounds of drunken shouting drifted through the thin walls, Josephine gathered the 7 children around her and began to sing. Her voice, clear and sweet as mountain water, filled the cramped sleeping quarters with a lullaby her own mother had sung to her long ago. The children, ranging from 4-year-old Tommy to 13-year-old Sarah, pressed close to her, their fear gradually melting away as she sang verse after verse, her hands smoothing hair and patting shoulders. Outside, Kade Harrison dismounted from his bay mare and tied her to the hitching post near the saloon. He had been riding for 3 days straight, driving a small herd of cattle from his ranch in the Ruby Valley to sell at the market in Elko. His body ached with exhaustion, his throat was parched with dust, but he needed to check on his old friend Marcus before finding a room for the night. Marcus ran the general store and always had the latest news about cattle prices and buyer prospects. The street was chaos. 2 miners were throwing punches in the mud while their companions cheered them on. A woman in a bright red dress stood on the saloon balcony, laughing at something Kade could not hear. Somewhere a dog was barking incessantly. He had started walking toward the general store when he heard it, a sound so pure and unexpected that he stopped dead in his tracks. A woman was singing. The voice came from a ramshackle building he had never paid much attention to before, something between the livery stable and the Chinese laundry. The melody was gentle, meant for children, but there was something in the quality of that voice that made his chest tighten. Kade had heard plenty of women sing in saloons and churches across the territory, but none of them had ever sounded like this. This voice carried hope and heartbreak in equal measure, sweetness tempered with strength. He found himself walking toward the building without conscious thought, drawn like a moth to lamplight. Through a gap in the wooden shutters, he could see inside. The room was lit by a single oil lamp, and in its golden glow sat a young woman surrounded by children. Her hair was the color of honey, pulled back in a simple bun with loose strands framing her face. She wore a plain gray dress that had been mended many times, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that made her beautiful. Kade stood there in the darkness, listening as she sang one lullaby after another. The children gradually settled, their eyes growing heavy. She sang until the last child had drifted to sleep. Then she gently extricated herself from the pile of small bodies and began moving quietly around the room, adjusting blankets and checking that each child was comfortable. He should have left then. It was improper to watch a woman without her knowledge, and Kade Harrison prided himself on being a gentleman despite his rough occupation. But he could not make his feet move. When she finally extinguished the lamp and walked toward what must be her own small room at the back of the building, he remained frozen in place, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the long ride. The next morning, Kade finished his business with the cattle buyers by noon and found himself walking past the orphanage again. In daylight, The building looked even more decrepit than he had realized. The roof needed repairs. Several boards on the walls had rotted through, and the whole structure leaned slightly to one side as if a strong wind might knock it over entirely. A small vegetable garden grew in the dusty yard, the plants struggling against the Nevada heat. The front door stood open to catch any hint of breeze, and he could hear children's voices inside, not crying or fighting but reciting something in unison. He climbed the 2 rickety steps to the entrance and knocked on the doorframe. The recitation stopped immediately, and a moment later the woman from the night before appeared. Up close, Josephine was even lovelier than Kade had thought. Her eyes were the color of sage, green-gray, and full of caution. She looked tired, with shadows beneath those eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, but her face lit with a polite smile. "Can I help you, sir?" Her speaking voice was as musical as her singing, though more guarded. Kade removed his hat, suddenly feeling like an awkward boy instead of a 24-year-old ranch owner. "I heard you singing last night, madam, to the children. I was just passing by and thought I might introduce myself. Kade Harrison. I have a ranch about 20 miles south of here." Josephine's expression became wary, and Kade realized how strange his words must sound. A man hearing her sing in the night and then seeking her out the next day. He rushed to explain. "I did not mean to intrude or make you uncomfortable. It is just that this place looks like it could use some repairs, and I have experience with carpentry. I thought I might offer my services, free of charge, for the children's sake." She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words and his intentions. Finally, she stepped back from the door. "That is very kind, Mr. Harrison. I am Josephine Bailey. I help run this orphanage with Mrs. Cooper, though she is currently visiting her sister in Sacramento and will not return for another 2 weeks." The children had gathered behind her, 7 pairs of curious eyes studying the tall stranger. Kade smiled at them, and a few smiled back. "The roof is the biggest concern," Josephine continued, gesturing upward. "When it rains, we have to put out every pot and bucket we own to catch the leaks, and that wall over there, the one facing north, it lets in terrible drafts in winter." Kade walked around the building, taking stock of what needed to be done. The list was long. The roof required new shingles. Several walls needed new boards. The steps were dangerous. The window frames had warped and no longer closed properly. The more he looked, the more he found wrong. "This will take several days of work," he said when he returned to where Josephine stood in the doorway, watching him with those cautious sage eyes. "Maybe a week or more. I will need to buy materials." "We have no money to pay you," Josephine said quickly. "The orphanage runs on donations, and we barely have enough for food most months." "I did not ask for payment," Kade replied. "I have the money for materials and I have the time. My ranch can spare me for a couple of weeks." She looked at him searchingly, trying to understand his motivation. He was not entirely sure he understood it himself. Yes, the building needed repairs and the children deserved better. But if he was honest, he wanted an excuse to be near that voice, near the woman who had sung so tenderly in the lamplight. "Why?" Josephine asked finally. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Kade turned his hat in his hands, searching for the right words. "I grew up in an orphanage in St. Louis. Different building, different state, but the same struggle. Never enough food, never enough warmth, never enough kindness. I was lucky. A rancher named Thomas Hart adopted me when I was 12, taught me everything about cattle and horses, left me his ranch when he died 3 years ago. I guess I never forgot what it felt like to be one of those children, hoping someone would care." The wariness in Josephine's eyes softened. "I did not know. I am sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for. I had a good life with Tom. He was a better father than my real one ever could have been." Kade settled his hat back on his head. "So, may I start on the repairs?" "Yes," Josephine said, and her smile was genuine this time, transforming her whole face. "Yes, please. Thank you." Kade spent that afternoon buying lumber and shingles, nails and tools. He arranged to stay at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who gave him a clean room and hearty meals for a fair price. The next morning, he arrived at the orphanage just after dawn, ready to work. The children were fascinated by him. They clustered around as he set up his ladder and began removing damaged shingles from the roof. Josephine tried to shoo them away, worried they would bother him, but Kade assured her he did not mind. He had always liked children, though he had never spent much time around them. Tommy, the youngest at 4, appointed himself Kade's assistant. He handed up nails one at a time, his small face serious with concentration. 8-year-old Lucy asked endless questions about everything from where he learned to fix roofs to what his favorite color was. Sarah, the oldest at 13, maintained a skeptical distance, watching Kade with sharp eyes as if waiting for him to reveal some hidden terrible nature. Josephine spent the morning teaching the children their lessons. Kade could hear her patient voice explaining arithmetic, then later reading aloud from a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. When noon came, she emerged with a simple lunch of bread and cheese and apples, enough for everyone including him. "You do not have to feed me," Kade protested. "You need this food for the children. You are working through the heat of the day on our behalf," Josephine replied firmly. "The least we can do is share our meal." They sat in the shade of the building, eating together. The children peppered Kade with more questions, and he found himself telling them about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the hawks that circled overhead and the coyotes that sang at night. Josephine listened quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Do you live alone on this ranch?" she asked when the children had finished eating and run off to play in the yard. "Mostly. I have 2 ranch hands who help with the heavy work, Miguel and his son Carlos. They have their own cabin on the property, but the main house is just me." "That sounds lonely," Kade shrugged. "I have the animals, and I ride into town often enough. It is not so bad." But as he said the words, he realized they were not entirely true. The house had felt lonely since Tom died, empty in a way it never had before. He had gotten used to the solitude, but that did not mean he enjoyed it. "What about you?" he asked. "You said you help run the orphanage. How did you come to Elko?" A shadow passed over Josephine's face. "I was married briefly. My husband Daniel was a clerk who dreamed of going west to seek his fortune. We made it as far as Salt Lake City before he fell ill. Typhoid. He died within a week." Her voice remained steady, but Kade could hear the old grief underneath. "I had no money to go back east and no family to return to anyway. I heard about the orphanage needing help and it seemed like Providence, a place where I was needed. I am sorry about your husband. Thank you. It has been over a year now. The pain is not so sharp anymore." She stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "I should get the children back to their lessons. Thank you again for the lunch company." Kade returned to the roof, but his mind was not on the work. He found himself thinking about Josephine, about the strength it must have taken to continue after such loss, to pour her energy into caring for orphan children when she must still be grieving. There was something remarkable about her, something beyond the beautiful voice and lovely face. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Kade would arrive at dawn and work until the heat became oppressive in early afternoon, then return in the cooler evening hours to work until dark. Josephine kept the children from being too much of a nuisance, though Kade genuinely enjoyed their company. Tommy remained his devoted assistant, and even Sarah began to warm to him after he fixed the broken doll she carried everywhere. In the evenings, after the work was done, Josephine would serve supper and Kade would join them. The meals were always simple, but she had a gift for making even basic ingredients taste wonderful. After supper, she would put the children to bed with her lullabies, and Kade would sit on the front steps, listening to that voice that had first drawn him here. One evening, after the children were asleep, Josephine came out to sit beside him. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the Nevada sky. The sounds of Elko's saloons drifted over on the warm breeze, but here in their corner of town, everything felt peaceful. "The roof is finished," Kade said. "No more leaks when it rains. I cannot thank you enough. You have done so much already. I still need to fix that north wall and replace the front steps, maybe another 3 or 4 days of work." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Josephine spoke softly. "Why did you really come back that morning, after hearing me sing?" Kade considered lying or deflecting, but something about the starlight and the quiet intimacy of the moment made him want to tell the truth. "Because I had never heard anything so beautiful in my life. Because I wanted to know the person who could make such a sound. Because I could not stop thinking about you all night long." He heard her breath catch. "Mr. Harrison." "Kade, please call me Kade, Kade." His name sounded right in her voice. "I am not looking for romance. I buried one husband already. I do not think my heart can bear that kind of risk again." "I understand," Kade said, though his chest felt tight. "I am not trying to push you into anything. I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth," Josephine repeated softly. She was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again. "Can I tell you a truth? I look forward to your arrival every morning. The children adore you, yes, but it is more than that. When you are here, this place feels less like a struggle and more like a home. And that terrifies me because I know you will finish the repairs eventually and return to your ranch, and we will go back to how things were before." Kade's heart leaped. He turned to face her in the darkness, wishing he could see her expression more clearly. "It does not have to be that way. I could visit. Elko is not so far from the ranch. I could come once a week or more if you wanted. I could bring supplies, help with whatever you need." "Why would you do that? You have your own life, your own responsibilities." "Because I want to," Kade said simply. "Because in the past week, I have felt more alive, more purposeful than I have in the 3 years since Tom died. Because I care about you and these children. Because I think maybe Providence brought me past this building that night for a reason." Josephine reached out in the darkness and found his hand. Her fingers were small and work-roughened, but her touch sent warmth flooding through him. "I am frightened," she admitted, "of caring too much, of losing again." "Life does not come with guarantees," Kade said. "Believe me, I know. But maybe that is exactly why we should not waste the time we have. Maybe we owe it to ourselves to take the chance." They sat holding hands on the steps as the night deepened around them, neither speaking, both thinking about possibilities and risks and the strange ways fate could intervene. The next morning, Kade arrived to find chaos. Little Tommy was running a fever, his small face flushed and his eyes glassy. Josephine was trying to keep him comfortable while also managing the other children, and the worry in her eyes cut Kade to the core. "I sent Lucy to fetch the doctor," Josephine said, pressing a damp cloth to Tommy's forehead. "But Dr. Matthews is often out on calls. It might be hours before he arrives." "What can I do?" Kade asked. "Could you watch the other children? Keep them occupied so they are not worried." "I need to stay with Tommy." Kade gathered the children and took them outside, away from the sick room. He told them stories about the ranch, taught them a card game Tom had shown him years ago, did everything he could to keep them distracted. but his mind was with Josephine and the little boy who had been his faithful assistant all week. Dr. Matthews finally arrived in late afternoon. He was a gruff older man with kind eyes who examined Tommy thoroughly while Josephine and Kade waited anxiously. Finally, he emerged from the sick room. "It is not typhoid or cholera, thank the Lord. Appears to be a bad case of summer fever. Keep him cool, give him plenty of water, and it should break in a day or two. He is young and strong. I expect he will pull through just fine." The relief on Josephine's face was profound. "Thank you, doctor." "What do I owe you?" Dr. Matthews waved off the question. "I do not charge for orphanage visits. Just take good care of the boy." He tipped his hat to Kade and left. That night, Josephine stayed by Tommy's bedside while Kade managed supper for the other children. He was not much of a cook, but he managed to put together a passable meal of beans and cornbread. After the children were fed, Sarah helped him get the younger ones ready for bed. "You are good at this," Sarah said as they tucked in 6-year-old Emma. "Taking care of children, I mean." "I am just doing what needs to be done," Kade replied. Sarah gave him a long, measuring look. "Are you going to marry Miss Josephine?" The question startled him. "I do not know. That would be up to her. I think you should. She is happier when you are around. We all are." Sarah paused, then added quietly, "It would be nice to have a father again." Kade felt emotion tighten his throat. "Were you in a family before? Before you came here, my parents died of influenza 2 years ago. There was no one else to take us in, me and my little brother Jack. We have been here ever since." She said it matter-of-factly, but Kade could hear the pain underneath. "Jack got adopted 6 months ago by a family moving to California. They only wanted one child and he was younger. I was happy for him, but I miss him something terrible." "I am sure you do," Kade said gently. "It is hard to be separated from family. Miss Josephine says maybe someday I will be adopted too, but I am getting too old. Most people want the little ones." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, trying not to reveal how much this hurt her. "You never know what the future holds," Kade told her. "Good things can come when you least expect them." He sat with the children until they fell asleep, then went to check on Josephine. She was still in the sick room, sitting beside Tommy's bed. The boy's breathing was easier now, his fever seeming to have decreased slightly. "You should rest," Kade said softly from the doorway. "I can watch him for a while." Josephine looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I cannot. If something happened while I was sleeping, I will wake you immediately if anything changes, but you will be no good to him if you collapse from exhaustion." She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Just for an hour. Wake me in an hour." Kade took her place beside the bed, and Josephine went to her own small room. He sat there in the lamplight, watching the rise and fall of Tommy's chest, thinking about everything Sarah had said. The children needed stability, a real family. Josephine needed help with the endless work of running this place. And he needed them all, though he had not realized how much until this week. Tommy stirred and opened his eyes. "Mr. Kade, I am here, buddy. How are you feeling? Hot? Tired?" The boy's voice was barely a whisper. "Is Miss Josephine mad at me for being sick? Of course not. She is just worried about you because she cares. We all care. Even you. Especially me," Kade said and meant it. "You are my best assistant, remember? I need you to get better so you can help me finish fixing this place." Tommy smiled faintly and closed his eyes again. Kade dampened the cloth and pressed it gently to the boy's forehead, and felt something shift in his heart. These children, this place, this woman, they had all become important to him in ways he could not fully articulate. More than an hour passed before Josephine emerged from her room, looking slightly refreshed. "I told you to wake me. You needed the sleep more than I needed the company," Kade replied. "His fever has come down a bit, I think." Josephine checked Tommy herself, then nodded with relief. Yes, it is better. Dr. Matthews was right. The worst seems to have passed. They sat together through the night, taking turns watching Tommy and dozing in the chair. By morning, the boy's fever had broken completely. He woke asking for breakfast, and Josephine actually laughed with relief. Kade left them to get some proper rest himself, returning to the boarding house to sleep for a few hours. When he came back in the afternoon, Tommy was sitting up in bed, still weak but clearly on the mend. The other children were playing quietly in the yard, and Josephine was in the kitchen preparing supper. "Thank you," she said when she saw him. "For last night, for everything. I do not know what I would have done without you. You would have managed. You are stronger than you think." She set down the knife she had been using to slice vegetables and turned to face him. "Kade, I have been thinking about what you said the other night, about taking chances." His heart began to beat faster. "Yes, I am still frightened. I do not think that will ever fully go away. But I also know that you are a good man, probably the best I have ever known, and I would be a fool to let fear keep me from something that could be wonderful." She took a breath. "I would like it very much if you would visit regularly, not just to help with repairs, but because I want to see you. Because I want to know you better. Because I think maybe I could care for you very much if I let myself." Kade crossed the small kitchen in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "I already care for you very much. I think I started caring the moment I heard you sing. And every day since then, it has only grown stronger." "We should take this slowly," Josephine said. "For the children's sake as well as our own. They have had so much instability in their lives. I do not want them to get attached if this does not work out." "It will work out," Kade said with a confidence he had not known he possessed. "I will make sure of it." Over the following weeks, Kade finished the repairs on the orphanage and then kept coming back. He made the 20-mile ride from his ranch to Elko twice a week, sometimes more. He brought supplies that Josephine could never have afforded on her limited budget. Fresh meat from his cattle, vegetables from Miguel's wife's garden, fabric to make new clothes for the growing children. But more than the material help, he brought his presence. He played with the children, taught them skills like roping and whittling, helped Josephine with the endless chores. Slowly, carefully, they built something together. It was not just romance, though there was certainly that. It was partnership, friendship, a gradual weaving together of their lives. Mrs. Cooper returned from Sacramento and was surprised but pleased to find the orphanage transformed. She was a kindly woman in her 60s whose husband had been a minister until his death 5 years earlier. She had dedicated herself to caring for orphans ever since, but her health was failing and she relied heavily on Josephine. "This young man is a blessing," she told Josephine. "I hope you realize what a gift the Lord has sent us." Josephine did realize it. Every time Kade rode up to the orphanage, her heart lifted. Every time he smiled at her or touched her hand in passing, she felt the walls around her heart crumbling a little more. She had thought herself done with love after Daniel's death, but what she felt for Kade was different from what she had felt for her first husband. Daniel had been a dreamer, a man with grand plans but little follow-through. Kade was steady, reliable, a man who made promises and kept them. One evening in late August, Kade asked Josephine to walk with him. They left Mrs. Cooper watching the children and strolled through the streets of Elko as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The town was growing rapidly, new buildings going up every week, but there were still quiet corners where they could talk without being overheard. "I want to show you something," Kade said. He led her to the edge of town, where a plot of land sat empty except for wildflowers and sagebrush. "I bought this property last week." Josephine looked around in surprise. "Why, your ranch is south of here." "Because I want to build a house. A real house with enough rooms for a large family. A house close enough to town that it would be easy to visit the orphanage regularly, to bring the children out for visits, to be part of the community. He turned to face her, his eyes serious. "I want to build a life here, Josephine, with you if you will have me." Her breath caught. "Kade, I know we have only known each other a few months. I know you said you wanted to take things slowly. But I am 24 years old, and in all my life, I have never been more certain of anything than I am of this. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your beautiful voice and the way you care for those children like they are your own. I want to marry you. I want to build that house and fill it with our own children, and I want us to continue helping at the orphanage together for as long as Mrs. Cooper needs us." Tears filled Josephine's eyes. "I love you too. I did not want to. I fought against it because I was so afraid, but I do love you, Kade Harrison, more than I thought possible." "Is that a yes?" He was smiling now, hopeful and radiant. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Kade pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, the beginning of something neither of them had dared to dream possible. They were married in September, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Elko. The orphans all attended, dressed in new clothes that Kade had bought for the occasion. Tommy was the ring bearer, taking his responsibility very seriously. Sarah stood up with Josephine, her face glowing with happiness. Even Mrs. Cooper wept joyful tears. After the wedding, Kade and Josephine moved into a suite of rooms at Mrs. Chen's boarding house while their house was being built. Josephine continued to work at the orphanage every day, and Kade split his time between overseeing the house construction, managing his ranch, and helping at the orphanage. It was a busy time, but a happy one. The house began to take shape on that empty plot of land. Kade hired the best carpenters in Elko and worked alongside them, determined that every detail should be perfect. He built it with wide porches for sitting in the evening, large windows to let in light, and a parlor where Josephine could sing to their future children. There were 6 bedrooms, because Kade had plans and dreams that extended beyond just their immediate family. One evening in October, as they sat on the boarding house porch after supper, Kade shared those dreams. "I have been thinking. The orphanage is so crowded and Mrs. Cooper is getting older. What if we made part of our new house available for some of the children? Not all of them, but maybe 2 or 3 could live with us permanently." Josephine turned to him with shining eyes. "Do you mean adopt them, if you are willing? I know we will have our own children eventually, but there is no reason we cannot start our family this way. I was thinking maybe Sarah, since she is aging out of the usual adoption age range and worries so much about her future. And Tommy, because he has attached himself to us both so firmly. And maybe one more, whichever child you think would benefit most." "Emma," Josephine said immediately. "She is so shy and quiet, often overlooked, but she has the sweetest heart. I think with the right family she could blossom." They approached Mrs. Cooper with the idea the next day. The older woman was delighted. "It is exactly what those children need, and it will help me so much, having 3 fewer mouths to feed on our limited budget. I think it is a wonderful plan." The legal arrangements for adoption took time, but by early December, everything was finalized. Sarah, Tommy, and Emma would officially become Sarah, Tommy, and Emma Harrison. The children were overjoyed, particularly Sarah, who had given up hope of ever having a family again. The house was finished just before Christmas. It was beautiful, solid, and spacious, built to last generations. Kade and Josephine moved in with their 3 newly adopted children, and for the first time in a long while, both adults felt like they had truly come home. Christmas that year was magical. Kade cut down a pine tree and the children decorated it with paper chains and popcorn strings. Josephine baked cookies and sang carols while the children danced around the parlor. On Christmas morning, there were simple gifts for everyone, nothing extravagant but chosen with love. Sarah received a new dress and a journal for writing her thoughts. Tommy got a wooden train set that Kade had carved himself. Emma was given a beautiful doll with a porcelain face and real hair, but the best gift was intangible. The feeling of being a family, of belonging, of being loved and wanted. Sarah said as much at supper that evening, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had. Thank you for choosing us." "We did not choose you," Kade said gently. "We were meant to find each other, all of us." As winter turned to spring, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Josephine still helped at the orphanage 3 days a week, but now she also had her own home to care for, her own children to raise. Kade managed his ranch with Miguel and Carlos, making the trip south several times a week, but always returning home in time for supper. In April, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and also some trepidation. She had lost a baby early in her marriage to Daniel, before he died, and the fear of losing another child haunted her. But Kade was endlessly supportive, making sure she did not overwork herself, bringing her to see Dr. Matthews regularly. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. By September, Josephine was large and uncomfortable but healthy. The children were excited about the coming baby, helping to prepare the nursery and arguing good-naturedly about whether it would be a boy or a girl. The baby arrived on a warm evening in late September after a long but uncomplicated labor. Dr. Matthews handed Kade a squalling, red-faced infant boy, and the new father felt his eyes fill with tears. "You have a son," the doctor announced. "A healthy, strong son." They named him Thomas Hart Harrison, after the man who had given Kade his start in life. Little Thomas, or Tommy as they called him to distinguish him from Big Tommy, had his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. He was adored from the moment of his birth, not just by his parents but by his older siblings. The following year brought more changes. Mrs. Cooper's health deteriorated to the point where she could no longer manage the orphanage. With great reluctance, she made the decision to close it and move to San Francisco to live with her daughter. The remaining 4 children were placed with families throughout Nevada, and Josephine wept to see them go, even though she knew it was for the best. But closing the orphanage also opened new possibilities. The building was sold, and the money was used to establish a fund to help orphans throughout the territory. Kade and Josephine became administrators of the fund, using Kade's business sense and Josephine's understanding of what orphans truly needed to make a real difference. They also opened their home. Over the next several years, 3 more orphan children came to live with the Harrisons, not through formal adoption but through simple need and love. There was Michael, a 10-year-old whose parents died in a mining accident. There was Rebecca, an 8-year-old abandoned by a father who could not care for her after his wife's death. And there was little Daniel, named by his dying mother and left on the steps of the church at just 3 months old. The Harrison house was full and loud and chaotic and wonderful. Josephine had her hands full managing such a large household, but she had never been happier. Kade expanded his ranching operation to support the growing family, bringing in more cattle and buying additional land. Miguel's son Carlos married and brought his young wife Rosa to live on the ranch, and Rosa became a dear friend to Josephine, the 2 women helping each other with children and household tasks. Sarah grew into a lovely young woman, smart and capable. At 18, she became a teacher at Elko's growing school system, living at home but independent and confident in ways she never could have imagined during her orphanage days. Tommy, now 14, worked on the ranch with Kade, showing a natural talent for handling cattle and horses. Emma, 12 and still shy but no longer painfully so, helped Josephine with the younger children and showed promise as a singer herself. More children came to Kade and Josephine naturally too. A daughter arrived 2 years after Thomas, a beautiful girl they named Grace. Then another son called Matthew. The house that had seemed so large when first built began to feel full, every bedroom occupied, every chair at the dinner table claimed. Through it all, Josephine sang. She sang lullabies to the babies, hymns while cooking supper, ballads while mending clothes. Her voice remained as pure and sweet as it had been that first night when Kade heard it drifting through the darkness. And Kade never tired of hearing it, never took it for granted. Sometimes he would stop whatever he was doing just to listen, marveling at how that voice had led him to this life, this family, this abundance of love. The years passed. The children grew. Sarah married a young lawyer and moved to Carson City, but visited often with her own growing family. Tommy took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing himself to be as capable as any man twice his age. Emma surprised everyone by falling in love with Dr. Matthews's nephew, a newly arrived physician who took over his uncle's practice. They married in a beautiful ceremony at the church where Kade and Josephine had wed years before. Michael became a mining engineer, using his tragedy-born understanding of mining dangers to improve safety for workers throughout Nevada. Rebecca married a shopkeeper and stayed in Elko, close to the family that had raised her. Little Daniel, who had arrived as an infant, grew into a serious, studious boy who dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and the children who were born to Kade and Josephine flourished too. Thomas grew tall and strong, eventually joining Tommy in running the ranch. Grace became a teacher like Sarah, with a particular gift for working with difficult students. Matthew showed an early aptitude for numbers and talked of becoming a banker. More orphans came through the Harrison home over the years. Not all of them stayed permanently, but each one was loved and cared for during their time there. The house became known throughout the territory as a place of refuge, where children without families could find safety and kindness. One evening in the spring of 1898, Kade and Josephine sat on their porch as the sun set, watching their youngest children play in the yard. They were both in their 40s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the marks of hard work and frequent laughter. 16 years had passed since that night when Kade first heard Josephine sing. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked. "Taking on so many children, so much responsibility." Kade reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in the familiar way of long marriage. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You are more than I ever dreamed possible." "I used to think my life ended when Daniel died," Josephine said softly. "I thought I would just go through the motions, caring for other people's children since I would never have my own family. I was so wrong. My life did not end. It was just waiting to truly begin. I am glad I heard you singing that night. I am glad you came back the next morning." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you were brave enough to tell me how you felt, even when I was too frightened to hear it properly. I am glad you were brave enough to let yourself love again." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. From inside the house came the sound of voices, the older children helping the younger ones get ready for bed. Soon, Josephine would go in and sing her lullabies, the same songs she had sung in that cramped orphanage room so many years ago. But now she sang in a warm, safe home, to children who were hers by choice if not always by birth, with a husband who loved her completely. Little Daniel appeared at the door, just 7 years old and still small for his age. "Mama, we are ready for the lullaby." Josephine rose, squeezing Kade's hand before releasing it. "I will be right there, sweetheart." Kade followed her inside as he did every night. The children were gathered in the large nursery that doubled as a playroom, the youngest already in their nightgowns, the older ones settled in chairs and on cushions on the floor. Even Thomas, now 16 and nearly a man, sat down to listen. None of them were too old for their mother's lullabies. Josephine began to sing, and the notes floated through the house like a benediction. Kade leaned against the doorframe, watching his wife and children, and felt his heart swell with gratitude. This was his life now, so different from the lonely existence he had lived before that fateful evening. This was love, in all its messy, complicated, wonderful fullness. When the song ended and the children were settled for sleep, Kade and Josephine walked hand in hand to their own bedroom. They had risen early and worked hard as they did every day, and sleep would come quickly. But first, Josephine turned to her husband in the lamplight. "I love you," she said, as she said every night. "Thank you for building this life with me." "I love you too," Kade replied as he replied every night. "Thank you for letting me." They had been given something rare and precious, a second chance at happiness, and they had seized it with both hands. The orphanage in Elko was long closed, but its legacy lived on in this house full of children, in the fund that helped others, in the love that had grown from those first tentative moments into something unshakable. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. There were weddings and births, celebrations and losses. Kade's hair turned fully gray, and Josephine's honey-colored locks became silver. Their children grew into adults, had children of their own, began the cycle anew. The ranch thrived under Tommy and Thomas's joint management. The orphan fund grew and expanded, helping hundreds of children find homes and opportunities. The Harrison name became synonymous in Nevada with generosity and kindness, with opening doors and hearts to those in need. When Kade was 62, he fell from a horse and broke his leg badly. It healed slowly, leaving him with a permanent limp, but it did not slow him down much. He still worked the ranch, still opened his home to children who needed it, still looked at his wife with the same love and wonder he had felt at 24. Josephine's voice remained clear even as she aged, though she sang more quietly now, usually just for the grandchildren who came to visit. But sometimes, on warm summer evenings when the whole family gathered, she would sing the old lullabies and everyone would fall silent to listen. Even the great-grandchildren, too young to understand the significance, would quiet in the presence of that voice. On Kade's 70th birthday, the whole family gathered to celebrate. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house to bursting. Sarah came from Carson City with her family. Emma and her doctor husband came from their home in Reno. Michael arrived from Virginia City, Rebecca from her shop in town. And all the children born to Kade and Josephine were there too, with their spouses and offspring. 70 people sat down to supper that evening, 3 generations connected by blood and choice and love. Tommy, now 52 and a grandfather himself, proposed a toast. To Kade Harrison, who built more than a house and a ranch. Who built a family from broken pieces and showed us all what it means to love without condition. Happy birthday, Pa. There were cheers and tears and much laughter. The evening stretched long into the night, full of stories and songs. And when it was finally time for the children to be put to bed, Josephine sang her lullabies one more time, her voice thinner now but no less sweet. Kade watched from his chair, too moved to speak. This was his legacy, all these people connected by love. It had started with a voice in the darkness, with a lonely cowboy who could not resist the pull of a beautiful song. It had grown into something beyond his wildest imaginings. Late that night, when the last guest had departed and quiet had finally descended, Kade and Josephine sat on their porch in the darkness. They were old now, their bodies worn but their hearts still strong. They had lived a full life, richer than either had dared to hope. "I would do it all again," Kade said quietly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Josephine replied. "My cowboy who heard me singing and decided he wanted that voice forever. I got so much more than a voice. I got everything." They sat together under the stars, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, grateful for the path that had brought them to each other and to this life. The orphanage was long gone, the building torn down to make way for a new hotel. But its spirit lived on in the family they had created, in the love they had shared freely with anyone who needed it. Years later, when both Kade and Josephine had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, their children gathered to remember them. The funeral was held at the church where they had married, and it seemed like half of Nevada turned out to pay respects. But the real memorial was in the lives they had touched, the children they had saved, the family they had built from nothing but love and determination. Tommy stood at the front of the church and told the story of how it had all begun. How his father had heard a beautiful voice singing lullabies to orphans. How he had come back the next morning, offering to fix a roof, but really seeking the woman who had sung so sweetly. How that moment had changed everything, not just for Kade and Josephine, but for dozens of children who had found love and safety in their home. "They taught us that family is not just about blood," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "They taught us that love is infinite, that there is always room for one more, that the best way to honor our blessings is to share them freely. They gave us everything, and they asked for nothing in return except that we pass it on." And the children did pass it on. Sarah opened a home for orphaned girls in Carson City. Michael established safety regulations that saved countless minors' lives. Emma and her husband provided free medical care to those who could not afford it. The biological children and the adopted children and the fostered children all carried forward the legacy of love and generosity that Kade and Josephine had embodied. The house in Elko remained in the family for generations, always with room for someone who needed it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was right, people swore they could hear the faint sound of a woman singing lullabies, her voice pure and sweet and full of love. It was just the wind, of course, playing through the eaves. But it was a comforting sound nonetheless, a reminder that love like that never truly dies. It echoes forward through time, changing lives and healing hearts, one song at a time. The story of Kade and Josephine became legend in Elko and beyond. Old-timers told it to newcomers, parents told it to children, and it took on the quality of myth even though every word was true. The cowboy and the widow who had found each other through a song and built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate sorrows. In the end, that was their gift to the world, not just the children they had helped or the money they had given or the legacy they had left. Their real gift was showing that it was never too late for love, never too late to choose hope over fear, never too late to build something meaningful. That sometimes the best families were the ones we chose, and that home was not a place but a feeling we created together. The town of Elko grew and changed over the decades, from a rough mining town to a modern city. But the Harrison name endured, carved on buildings and scholarships and foundations. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Love multiplies when it is shared, and the bravest thing we can do is open our hearts even when we are afraid. Kade had wanted Josephine's voice forever. In the end, he got 54 years of it, 54 years of lullabies and laughter, of songs sung over cradles and at family gatherings. It was not quite forever, but it was enough. More than enough. It was a lifetime of love, and that was the greatest gift two people could give each other. Their graves sat side by side in the Elko cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that had grown from a sapling planted on their wedding day. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a single line Kade had chosen years before his death. Here lie two souls who found each other in the darkness and built a light that still burns. And it did still burn. In the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward. In the institutions they had founded and the lives they had changed. In the story that parents still told their children about listening to the quiet voice that calls to your heart. Somewhere in Elko, there was always a child being tucked into bed, a lullaby being sung, a love story beginning. The cycle continued, generation after generation, proof that one moment of courage, one decision to take a chance on love, could ripple out across time and touch countless lives. Kade Harrison had been a lonely cowboy with a ranch and no one to share it with. Josephine Bailey had been a widow certain she would never love again. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. A family, a legacy, a love story that would inspire people for generations to come. And it had all started with a song in the darkness, a voice so beautiful that a man could not walk away, and a woman brave enough to let herself be heard. That was the magic and the mystery of love, the way it could find us when we least expected it, and transform us into something better than we had been alone. The sun set over Nevada as it had for millennia, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. In the Harrison family home, now inhabited by the fourth generation, a young mother sang a lullaby to her infant daughter. The words were the same ones Josephine had sung all those years ago, passed down through the family like a precious heirloom. The baby's father stood in the doorway, watching, and felt his heart swell with a familiar emotion. He was thinking of his great-great-grandparents, of the story he had been told since childhood, of the legacy they had left. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, what they had really given their family, not just a name or a house or financial security. They had given the example of what love could be when it was lived fully, courageously, generously. That night, as stars filled the Nevada sky, the young father made a silent promise to the ancestors he had never met but whose influence shaped his life. He would carry forward their legacy. He would love boldly and live generously. He would remember that family was more than blood, that home was more than walls, that the greatest gift was love freely given. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their earthly time is done, perhaps Kade and Josephine smiled. Their work was complete. Their love had been transformed into something eternal, living on in the hearts and lives of all those who came after. The story ended where it had begun, with a lullaby in the darkness and love that refused to be denied. It was a simple story, really, just a cowboy and a widow who took a chance on each other. But from that simple beginning had flowed a river of love that touched hundreds of lives and would continue to flow for generations to come. That was the power of love, the reason it was worth the risk and the fear and the pain. Because when we opened our hearts, when we chose connection over safety, when we sang our songs into the darkness and trusted someone would hear, we created something that outlasted our brief time on earth. We created meaning. We created family. We created forever, one moment at a time,